Hi, friends. Welcome to the Recover Your Life podcast. I'm your host, Bridget Blood. Together, we are building a community of men and women who are learning what it means to grieve well, rest well, and love well, to live the life we dream of. No one is left out of this grand adventure. Now is the time to recover your life. And I am so excited for our conversation today to invite my friend, Jared Darby. Welcome to the show, Jared.
Thank you so much. Honored to be here. This is a long time in the making. I remember when you first told me that one day we'll do this, and what was that, maybe a year or so ago? But it's just so cool that we get to have this conversation that I've gotten to see. Really has changed so much in me, just having that original conversation with you. So this is really cool. Excited to be here.
Yeah. Can't wait. I think for me, I was talking to someone earlier today and I was just kind of sharing the heart of season 1 of this podcast is for us to kind of lay the ground rules of our family values of in the Recover Your Life podcast community. This is who we are. And these are the types of conversations we have. This is the types of things that matter to us. This is how we engage with people when we agree and we don't agree, and this is how we get help. And so just kind of beginning to compile a whole season of conversations that our listeners have been part of. And so for today, I really want to kind of process this whole idea of honor, because for me in my life story, I think as I've gotten older, I've had to realize that where I used to have a lot of like black and white, like this is exactly how this works, I've had to kind of learn to dance with God in the gray. That honor is messy is kind of the phrase that I use. Honor is messy. Yeah. And it matters like where we are. I think I've even grieved that. I've grieved how much I've lost in life when I neglect the fact that life is really complex. Yeah. So in any interaction that I'm having throughout the day, there's my interaction with the other person. There's, my lens and what's happening for me that day, my past trauma history, my hopes, my expectations, the other person's story, what they may have, misunderstood. There's all this at play in it. There's the cultural context and what it takes place. There's, what we expect religiously from. There's so many factors. And I think sometimes I feel overwhelmed by that of like, well, how am I ever going to create connections with people without messing it up, right? Because I want to follow the rules. Yeah. But to say no, like actually honoring connection in our lives is way more complicated. And the beautiful gift that means is we get to build friendships, relationships, ministry partnerships, marriages, families. We get to design them in a way that feels connecting. So I guess this is kind of a fun question just as we start. Like when you think about your life, maybe even like childhood, like college age, young adult, like young Jared, like who were the people in your life that you go, oh, these people honored or they modeled honor really well? Even if it might even just be like a sense of like, these are the people that like, no, these people lived with honor.
Yeah. So just a little bit about me. I grew up in a ministry household. So like, maybe that context isn't very familiar for some people, but I know like being a pastor's kid was challenging and complex in itself because it's funny. I read so many books, and it seems like a consistent theme. I was reading a book recently by Eugene Peterson, and he was just kind of speaking about the honorlessness of being in pastoral ministry. And I think you can fast forward that to today. I think people on Instagram or social media, they see maybe a Stephen Furtick or Judah Smith or these guys who are like, or even if they don't know names, they know that when it comes to famous pastors, everybody kind of honors them. Yeah. Because they're famous, they make money, and no disrespect there at all. But that's just such the minority. Whereas I come from more of the normal pastor house, very small congregation, really just a guy who's going to be there in the community when somebody's going through a death in the family, or
Yeah.
when nobody else is showing up at a hospital. Like, that's my dad, you know?
Hmm.
So growing up in the household that a lot of people may not connect American church with, but it was just normal um, to experience the pain of dishonor. You watch a lot of people um, kind of speak ill uh, of those small pastors. And growing up in the ministry, we saw a lot of that, a lot of hurt, a church split. But we
Yeah.
also saw my parents walk through it with so much dignity,
Wow.
love around every single scenario where there probably should have been some honest conversations about the way people were treating our family. I got to watch a beautiful example of two people that just loved and honored people very, very well.
Hmm.
So I was blessed young to be a part of a family culture that um, no matter what came, it was just kind of like that classic sense of the good meaning. And in that book, that's kind of what it was like. Like pastors have lost that space where the word pastor meant something special or something
Yeah.
real or something good and wholesome. And it's kind of turned into a different thing with the evangelical split and everything that's happening right now in culture.
Hmm.
Um, but I got to see some of the most beautiful sides of a local church that really didn't care about. We didn't have Instagram back then, so it was like there was no notoriety given. There was just a man, his wife, his two kids, living in a space where they knew the people and loved well and honored well. So my dad and my mom, really early on for me, showed me what type of value um, our family was going to place on human beings and people.
Yeah. That's so great. I think for when we talk about honor, I think just as I'm thinking about parents, right? This is a
Mm,
huge part that when I coach people, I walk through stuff. It's like, hey, like what was the family that you grew up in? What was that like? And most of us can align with we have really beautiful parts of the way that we were raised. And we have
right.
really dysfunctional parts because our parents are
Sure.
human and we're learning and we're growing. And so I think sometimes this idea of honor, this idea of esteeming someone with respect, is the to address the pain is wrong, right? And I just think about
Right.
that, whether that's with leadership in your life or family members or friends. For me, the kind of the picture that came to mind was I just was watching this Sweet Magnolias on Netflix, very very girly show, and
That doesn't surprise me.
there's this moment. I won't give it away just people haven't watched the last season yet, but there's this moment in the friend group where someone's in a situation that's not great, and so one of the friends asks, they're like, hey, are you happy with this situation? And she gets really offended and was like, I can't believe that you asked me that. And it was this painful moment of, for you honoring me, you just have to pretend that this is okay. And
Right.
again, that wasn't what was said. That was what, kind of just the parallel I'm bringing right now is I think when we talk about honor, it can get really confusing because on one side, it's the I want to honor someone, I want to give people grace to be human. And there's this other part of like, well, does honor mean that when I see someone engaging in any sort of behavior or choice or the way that they talk to me just felt funny or like something painful that I just have to kind of pretend that didn't happen to honor them? Like, when we kind of, how do you hold both? How do you hold the both of, maybe it's not both. Maybe it's the, maybe let's back up the train a little bit. What is honor?
Yeah.
Maybe that's a deeper question. What is honor? Because that's the parallel. Is the honor isn't pretending that someone is perfect.
Right.
So how do we hold that
That's so
tension?
good. I think I haven't seen Sweet Magnolias,
Mm-hmm. It's all right.
but um, the situation. I'm sure anybody listening right now, um, the situation really is applicable, and I'm going to guarantee if you've had a friend going through a difficult situation, you know the tension.
Yeah.
Um, I'll bring it back to a show that we've all seen, Boy Meets World, right? And uh, Corey is dealing with one of Sean's girlfriends,
Mm.
And I think he thought she was cheating on him or something crazy happened, and
Mhm.
he had to like wrestle through the moment of like, do I tell him the truth about what's going on? Is that going to be worse? And then of course in every show the friend finds out that you knew, and then it's worse even than if you would have just been honest and been like, hey, here's the
Mm.
situation.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the tension that we live in. It's to have a conversation about pain
Mhm.
with the knowledge that this could end up bringing about more pain.
Mhm.
So when you ask the question, what is honor? I think it's impossible to answer that question
Mhm.
without acknowledging what pain is.
Mhm.
And the
That's
reason
great.
why is because I think we live in a culture right now that equates honor with tolerance.
Wow. Yep.
Um, so that is the basis of all. Honor is a basic human right.
Mm.
Uh, And I think if you read Plato's Republic, or if you read even things that aren't inherently Judeo-Christian, or like
Mhm.
the majority of people would believe that that's why slavery is so innately wrong. Like if you have some belief in a higher power, right? Um, if you do believe in that higher power, you know that higher powers don't violate the law of free will. Like
Mhm.
even if you're like whatever religion like, there's not a God in the sky who's just like making sure we slave away, and which is why I think most people have such a disgust towards slavery.
Mm.
It's because like as human beings, we're doing the one thing even a God wouldn't do. We're
Wow.
taking away someone's human dignity.
Mhm.
And another way to say that is we're taking away their basic right
Mhm.
of being honored
Yep.
in the most basic way.
Mhm.
We're taking away their right to be honored. So in all that, I'm just kind of getting us to the place where we can begin to realize that honor is a basic human
Mhm.
right. It's given simply because you were born with consciousness.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that we live in a culture now that's kind of waking up to the spaces in our history, if we're talking about American culture,
Mhm.
where honor was withheld,
Wow.
and now there are massive repercussions.
Mhm.
I think everybody right now is we're talking about the church, and we're talking about evangelicalism, and then we're also talking about politics. That's the massive
Yep.
conversation on everybody's radar. We're talking about social media. We're talking about
Mhm.
the division between races, racism, and all these things.
Yep.
I think if you trace it back, you really are experiencing the pains of a culture that fails to honor.
Mm.
American culture does incredible at adoration
Mhm.
with somebody that we think is really important, right? Celebrities get
Yeah.
a ton of adoration. But you can see with the way the tabloids operate or the way that social media comments, we can adore when we're ready or when we want to, but honor is missing. And that
Mhm.
travels all the way back to our very long history of taking away um, the rights of human beings
Yeah.
that they were born with. So I think if you look at the division, the things that are happening in our culture, the biggest conversation to me
Mhm.
is this um, inability to define and then display
Mhm.
honor.
Yeah.
And just to answer the question, because I know sometimes on podcasts you get into that mode where you're just like talking about it and
Mhm.
you don't actually answer the question. Um, to answer that question of what is honor, to me, it's a basic definition. It just means to give somebody their due um, for being born a human being,
Yeah.
which to me is the opportunity and the ability um, to own your person.
Mhm.
You don't remove somebody's ability to own to be them.
Yep.
Um, and I think we can dive into that much deeper, but I think that that's the easiest way to answer the
Yeah.
question, like what is honor?
Yeah, no, I love that. I think even, we talked about tolerance. I think there's all these spaces in our life of like, sometimes the honoring thing is to have the conversation. Sometimes the honoring thing.
Yeah,
That's why I say honor is messy. Is like, okay,
it's very
sometimes
messy.
sometimes it says, okay, I'm going to just give a little bit of space to give people time to breathe and kind of process through their own junk, right, in their own story.
Right.
Be like, okay, now we're gonna now we're gonna reengage. Sometimes honor is saying, hey, what you post on social media, like, I'm really uncomfortable and this is why. Sometimes
Right.
it's, I'm not engaging in a social media debate. It's, but again, it goes back to the, like, can I engage in a way that honors the innate goodness of someone's humanity,
Right.
regardless or not if I experience pain from what's being shared. I think about this in a lot of how we were trained to evangelize, right? A lot of how we were trained to share the gospel um, degrades the value of other humans, and it's
Yep.
solely focused on defending God. And for me, I always say, like, if we want to know the a mark of Christian maturity, it's that we no longer feel the need to defend God.
Yeah.
It's not that we
That's
don't,
so good.
we honor God. We believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and life. All of those things are true. But when my whole purpose in engaging with another person that God made is to tell them why they're wrong, and the
Mm,
focus is no longer to give honor to who they are, then I've missed the whole point of the gospel anyway.
that's so good. I think one of the things I talk about a ton, um, as a speaker, as a preacher, as a pastor, I teach this often. Is I think that modern Christianity, especially evangelicalism, starts at the cross, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where we immediately go. I don't know how you were saved, but for
Yeah.
me, it was this like immense fear
Hmm.
of going to hell. Like
Wow.
I had dreams about it, and Jesus could have been a sock puppet. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm gonna choose whatever doesn't get me here. And the reason why is because I like in the tradition that I was raised in, it was a massive emphasis on the cross, right?
Mm-hmm.
Human beings are born in sin, shaped in iniquity. These are the type of things that were said around human beings. So immediately, my religious perspective
Mm-hmm.
was that people were so dirty, broken, messed up that if they don't have Jesus, or if they don't accept the cross, the version of the cross that we're offering, they're
Mm-hmm.
still stuck in that dirty, broken, busted place.
Yeah.
And we can love them as long as they give us some type of interest that this is what they want. They recognize their dirtiness and their brokenness, even if they don't even know that they need Jesus yet. But at least they recognize, and I'm dirty, I'm broken, I'm hurting.
Mm-hmm.
What I always teach is, I think that we've got it backwards,
Mm-hmm.
because the story of God and people doesn't start with Jesus and the
Mm-hmm.
cross.
Mm-hmm.
The story of God and people actually begins in Eden.
Yeah.
And the first things that God says about human beings is that we are good. He says that he created Adam, and he saw that it was good.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next thing that he says about Adam once he creates Eve is that they were naked and unashamed.
Yep.
So we see this picture, this narrative of the heart of God creating human beings to be good, to be unashamed, to be intimate. And obviously, we'll get to the cross later.
Yeah.
But if we start, to me, that's where the lack of honor in our American culture kind of began. And even in the
Mm-hmm.
church, it's like we immediately go to somebody's brokenness. Um, it's the reason why like gossip columns are so great, because we have this
Yep.
innate draw to the nasty, to the broken, and it's because we're missing that crucial
Mm-hmm.
foundation of honor. But if we begin in the garden, you start from beauty instead of brokenness.
Yep.
And to me, if you can start from beauty instead of brokenness, like honoring people becomes a part of your nature instead of something you have to continue to remind yourself about after the conversation where we've dishonored, or like it allows for the messiness to be in real time
Mm-hmm.
instead of having to clean up the mess as often. Does that make
Yep.
sense?
Yeah. Well, I also think, like, the goal stops being connection. I think about, even, as I work through my own story of trauma in my life, for me, I've had to acknowledge, even in, like, in the last year, of, oh, there, because of experiences that I've had, because of some of the teaching I grew up in, like, I typically show up in a space of, like, I don't know if people are safe.
Hmm.
And when I'm always trying to protect myself against the bad guy, I do not have capacity to build connection in that space because I'm just trying to survive.
Wow.
And so that doesn't mean that, again, but that's honor, right? Because I have honor towards me. So that doesn't mean that I just let whoever into my life and that there's no cost. No, there is a cost to, and I think even, about the garden is like, I think about, even the idea of the tree that's like, okay, you can do everything else except this. There
Right.
was a cost to connection, and the cost was all of this, but the cost is the no.
The
And
boundary.
so
Yeah.
the boundary, and so being able to say no, like there is a cost to connection and honor, but having to even process through like what happens in my body in this whole, as I've lived a life of this teaching of like people are evil, don't trust people, they're out to get you, like even the idea I think about like people who do not believe what I believe, of like,
Right.
oh, like the friendships, are going to influence you. And I'm like, okay, well, I end up looking at people as threats or like as making me dirty. And it's like, how is that honoring to people? Which is very
Hmm.
different than saying, hey, for us to build a safe friendship or working relationship, regardless of what you believe, what your politics are, your background, whatever it may be, it's the, hey, I feel really hurt when someone lies to me. so
Right.
so that's not going to be part of our connection, and making it more about, what does it take to build flourishing connection over what does it make to build, like honor is not you have to be the same as me, but
Yeah.
it's also not the tolerance to say I'll just let you do whatever you want and pretend that who you are doesn't have an impact to me.
Well, even if we use like, and if you're listening to this and maybe you don't um, kind of hold to a orthodox
Yep.
Judeo-Christian belief, it's totally fine. But even that kind of garden analogy as a prototype, if you begin to look at that, what you're saying, which is, um, I'm not going to violate or allow you to push past boundaries. Like just because I honor you doesn't mean that there's not a limit.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you look at that as like a story or an archetype, like God created people
Mm-hmm.
and he honored us. How did he honor us? Well, he gave us free will. Like again, to go back to the original definition, honor is allowing human beings to be them, right?
Yep.
It's the the ability to let somebody choose, and again, free will to inhabit your person, and even God honors human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a different type of perspective. But
Yep.
in the honor of the garden, there were still limits. The human beings weren't created with no limits to just say you can do whatever you want, just go.
Mm-hmm.
That's real honor. Um, the limit was don't eat from this tree.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what are our limits? Well, for yours, it could be, hey, I love you, and I'm okay with you having your beliefs, your like you just said, your backgrounds, your political, whatever it may be. But here are my boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
or in other words, like here is my tree,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like as long as you don't break that, you don't violate trust.
Mm-hmm.
We can get through everything else.
Mm-hmm.
This is my tree. And it's not an ultimatum as much as it is like you're saying. It's a limit
Yep.
because every relationship um, is built on two things: honor. Well, I would say three things: honor, trust, and boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're missing one without the other,
Yep.
you're going to have a garden experience all over where somebody goes past the limit, then hides. There's shame, there's guilt, there's all these different things.
Mm-hmm.
But if we can figure out the honor piece to say, how do I allow people, especially in conversations where we're talking about past hurts or trying to recover some semblance of health in my life and trying to figure out relational connection with other people, if we don't establish a culture of honor and it becomes a culture of tolerance or self-denial even.
Yep.
We either like tolerance is a dishonor of someone else, and self-denial can be a version of dishonor of my own persons,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think if we miss the importance of limits inside of the conversation of honor, we throw honor out of the window, and
Yep.
now it just becomes a free for all where you can do your thing. I really actually have no love for you, and I can do my thing. We can coexist as long as we don't get close.
Mm.
And that is not a recipe for intimacy.
Yep.
That's a recipe for cohabitation, which is not true human connection,
Yep.
right? But I love that thought of just like the importance of limits inside of the conversation of honor.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love the piece you brought up about the whole self-denial thing
Yeah,
because, ooh, wow, right? So, at least in my experience, so much of what my prior definition of honor was, specifically in the way I should honor God, was very much central to self-abandonment or self-denial.
right.
It
I
was
think
this.
yeah,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. Oh, you're good.
Well, I just think about the whole removal of, even just like simple how this would sound is I'm not going to pray. I'm going to pray that God's will would happen, right? It's kind of this removal, and it's not, well, no, it's an abandonment piece, not a surrender. I think there is a difference. There's a difference between like
Yeah,
loving, connected surrender and abandonment and breaking connection. Um,
yeah.
so yeah, let's talk about a little bit about that of like what does it look like to I want to talk about let's keep it for this moment. I want to talk about specifically in developing a relationship with honoring God. Um, what does connection to self mean in that space of honor?
Yeah, I think it's, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe we have to put this in the show notes, but it's either Matthew 11 or 16, um, where it's the space where, if you go back in the Message version, it basically says that Jesus looks at his disciples and it says, then he starts on his disciples. And he said, his message to them was, if you want to be with me, you're going to have to let me take the lead.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be in control. Self-sacrifice is the only way. Um, and then he says the only way to finding your true self. And I love the way that the Message puts it, because
Yeah.
modern evangelical language consistently has this thought. And if you've ever been to a camp or a D now, you've heard this conversation,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's less of me.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a common modern
Mm-hmm.
evangelical statement. Like there's got to be less of me. There's got to be less of me, more of God, because it's
Yeah.
that ancient Pauline um, doctrine of where there's less of me, like may I decrease, Lord, that you may increase. But if you go into the Greek and really study what he's saying, he's not saying that I get rid of my persons and become this like God robot.
Yep.
He's saying I get rid of the parts of me that I have failed to allow honor to invade and love to invade, so that the whole of me can experience the love and honor of
Mm-hmm.
God. And now I don't become a version of Jesus that walks around and just says, love thy neighbor, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I become the version of me that has my personality, that has grown up with my culture, with my experiences, but has done the hard work of rendering the dishonored the dishonored places in my life
Mm-hmm.
ineffective, and I've become the version of my true self that only exists when I can adopt honor well and simultaneously adopt the spiritual discipline of self-sacrifice well.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, like the greatest form of honor, or in Jesus's words, like the greatest form of love is somebody that would lay their life down for one of their friends, right?
Yep.
And then obviously he showed us that example. So it's to get to a space where, and people were like, well, wouldn't that be self-denial? No. Because when we lay down ourselves for our friends, we do it out of tolerance. We haven't done the hard work of figuring out the spaces in our life that are still
Mm-hmm.
experiencing dishonor. We're not acutely aware of the spaces in our life that need healing, or that like the trauma needs to be worked out. What we're doing is we're afraid to honor ourselves, so we cower and let somebody else walk over us. That's
Mm-hmm.
not the same thing as self-sacrifice.
Yep.
Um, that is actually like self-torture. That's a form of
Mm-hmm.
self-degradation, where I'm saying, you know what, you can go because I. What Jesus is talking about is I'm fully aware of my person.
Mm-hmm.
I've honored me well. And even though the person across the table from me maybe hasn't done that work, or hasn't experienced whatever, fill in the blank, I am going to sacrifice a fully whole and honored
Yeah.
self for someone else who needs love.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a complete and total flip from I can't bear to be alone. I can't bear to experience the hard spaces in my life
Yeah.
that need to be addressed. So I'm just going to sit back and let someone else kind of do their thing. But in that self-denial conversation, true self-sacrifice is only available when you can honor well,
Mm-hmm.
and especially honor yourself
Mm-hmm.
well. And I think that that's where that tolerance versus honor conversation really becomes heavy. Because I think there's a lot of people in our culture right now, especially Christian people, that think that um, allowing somebody else to walk over me is honor.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but honor is given, it's not taken.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's where that conversation really becomes a massive piece of, again, unwiring and then rewiring what like following God is actually supposed to look like.
Mm-hmm. And I think, the baseline is, what is your definition of the true self, right?
Wow.
Because if the
Okay.
true self, because, well, even when you talked about, it really matters, like our worldview matters if we start at the cross or if we start at Eden, right?
Right.
Because if our true self, I pulled it up in Romans 7 in the Passion Translation. I love this. It's, so if my behavior, this is Romans 7:20 in the Passion Translation, it says, so if my behavior contradicts my desire to do good, I must conclude that it's not my true identity doing it, but the unwelcome intruder of sin hindering me from being who I really am. And then it goes on in verse 22, which I love. It
Wow.
says, truly, deep within my true identity, I love to do what pleases God.
Wow.
And so I think about this, this idea of, if the way that we were created was in beautiful, like good, beautiful connection, like those were all like language that God gave us in creation, to say, okay, sin was introduced. So um, when I'm addressing sin in my own life, like it is not me. It is something that's broken and requires redemption. Like I'm not removing the need of a savior by saying that um,
Right.
the sinfulness is not who I am. Um, it still is in need of redemption. And at the same point, when I can go back to the beginning place, when I honor that my creative order was good and that my true identity wants to live in a way that pleases God, it allows me to engage in any behavior or pattern in my life that removes me from that, in a way that says honor moves me closer to God, self, and others. And any version of dishonor moves me away from those things, which again brings in the self-abandonment piece, right? Because
Yeah.
when we're talking about sacrifice in the way that you are, and in the way that I think Jesus explains it in the Gospels, is you're moving closer to yourself, God, and others in that sacrifice. But when we're talking about
Exactly.
tolerance, we actually have to move away in the posture of our heart from God, self, and others in order to be able to do that.
Mm. That's so good. I think as you were talking about that, I don't know. Um, I know your background is in counseling, and there's some psychology interest there. Carl Jung for me is a read that has been, again, not inherently Christian, but as like my interest in psychology go, and I spent a year in my master's for clinical counseling, and then I quit.
Cool.
Different story for a different day. But like this idea that he speaks about often, the collective self, like having to have um, total connection to the conscious and the unconscious, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why, like with what you're saying, that's why it's so important to understand where the pain comes from.
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible to honor without total integration of
Mm-hmm.
both the pain, the good, like it's your personality, it's your experiences, it's the trauma, and it's the divine meeting
Yep.
at this center. And I think that it's impossible, again, to kind of have this idea that honor or relationship with God can be attained
Mm-hmm.
through less of me and just more of Him. That's
Mm-hmm.
not actually the translation there. Like that's not actually
Mm-hmm.
what it's saying. You just gave us the Romans 7 version of what like an inherently whole person is supposed to look like as
Yeah.
they're walking towards honoring the relationships around them. And it
Mm-hmm.
requires a total integration of every piece of your being.
Yep.
So when we have the conversation like, what is honor? It's impossible to live in free will. Again, if we go back to
Mm-hmm.
that original definition, honor is like being free to be my own person. It's
Yep.
impossible to live in honor and then subsequently give honor if I am not actually free.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I'm bound, or if there's parts of my person that I haven't explored, and it's causing um, things to kind of pop up. I have conversations with folks often um, who talk about their anxiety or
Mm-hmm.
the things that they're going through, but they have no way to address the root. So
Yeah.
it's like, man, I'm experiencing crippling anxiety, but I don't know why.
Yep.
That's the most dangerous space to be in. I
Mm-hmm.
remember this was 5 years ago, and I like my dad had a truck. It was an F-150,
Mm-hmm.
2013. Like the rims were blacked out. It was a Lariat. He put some LED upgrades on. I mean, it just looked awesome. And
Yeah.
at the time, I was like really excited because he was like, "Hey, Jared, I want a new car. I'll give you the truck for X amount of $1,000, which was like 10 grand under what he could sell it. All you got
Mm-hmm.
to do is come to Houston and pick it up." Well, that weekend that he said he'd finally sell it to me was, I think it was Harvey in Houston, or
Mm-hmm.
it was one of the floods. And I had a guy rolling with me
Wow.
who was going to drive with me so he could drive back. And he decided to come with me. Even though my wife was like, "You should not do this. It's going to be crazy." I'm like, "But I want that truck." Right. So I drive to Houston, we get
Yeah.
it, and we're like outrunning floodwaters the entire time. I remember driving through and hearing the water, like almost, I'm on the lift a little bit. So I'm hearing the water at my door. And like halfway back, the trip home was like 19 hours when it was really supposed to be an 8-hour trip because of the traffic. And I remember in the car, about 4 hours from home, I was like somewhere in Louisiana. I had a massive panic attack.
Yeah.
I called the hospital. Um, I thought I was having a heart attack. I was texting my wife like I'm about to
Wow.
die. Like it really did feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
Get into the hospital, and and they said, "You're fine. Like we ran the test, you're good." They released us at like 6 a.m. the next morning, and then we drove home. And I remember feeling the feelings that were the beginnings of the panic attack, and
Yep.
noticing that I had been having those for months.
Mm-hmm.
And it was this feeling of like sharp pain, shortness of breath. But every time I would feel it, I'd be like, "Okay, I'm fine. It's no big deal."
Mm-hmm.
Um, Subsequently, after that panic attack, I started to get those
Mm-hmm.
warning signs periodically,
Yep.
but I didn't know the root.
Yep.
And my body was communicating to me, there's parts of your unconscious that you haven't addressed, And now it's bubbled up so far um, that you're not able to function
Mhm.
correctly out of complete and total honor for your persons. That
Mhm.
now we're going to make sure you know something's wrong here.
Yep.
And it took, for me, years of counseling, walking through trauma. Um, for me personally, spiritual meditation, silence and solitude, like really
Yep.
employing some disciplines in my life that allowed me the space to go there. But I
Mhm.
think that everyone who's dealt with anxiety or depression or suicide, suicidal thoughts, like there are these signs that pop up. And again, those in themselves are not wrong. But do you know the root
Mhm.
to what's causing that? Because at the time I didn't know the root. That's the most
Yep.
dangerous place to be in, right? I didn't know the
Mhm.
root. So I couldn't fully integrate honor
Mhm.
into my persons and then into the relationships around me.
Yeah. Well, even as you say that, I just think about, it's kind of the whole idea whenever they talk about, emotional health, they always say, like, you only can lead someone as far as you've, done the work yourself. But I think in the same
Yeah.
way that, like, you only can honor others to the depth that you've honored yourself, right? I mean, it's
Wow.
bring it back to Jesus, right? Of the, like, hey, love others the way that you love yourself. And
Yeah.
so I think
Yeah.
for me, one of the things that's really important, and, you know, regardless of how people get connected to partnership, like, it's okay. Like, I just want to say that it is normal and necessary for us as adults to be in partnership with people that have the skill set to help us honor the parts of our stories, consciously or subconsciously, that were dishonored, either because of intentional things that happened to us, harm that happened to us, or unintentionally, just the fact that we're in brokenness. Um,
Right.
that is not something that we just figure out by ourselves. Like, yeah, there are really important moments I've had with God, or had just kind of in my own self-reflection, where I go, oh yeah, that light bulb moment. But I think it's worth saying that this is something, even you said this, of like, this was in partnership of you reaching for therapeutic help and saying, hey, I need someone
Yeah.
to help
Yeah.
kind of process through this. Um, because again, I think just so much about um, just the people that I really don't like, right? Like, I don't like them. I feel pain with them. I
Right.
They're the people that I don't want to run into, right? Like, when those things
Yeah.
pop up in us, to say, okay, like, there's something about that story that is painful for me. And so to
Mm.
honor the pain that was present, I found, right? This is why the grieve well value is so essential to me, is because when I actually give that space to say, hey, in this relationship dynamic, I experience, and I name specifically, with a counselor, with a friend, with someone that can also honor the integrity of the person who caused harm, to say, okay, I'm going to show up fully present in my body experience of the pain. When I do that, the capacity that I have for compassion for that person's brokenness in the middle of that, that's
Mm.
not an excuse for the pain that they caused, but it's actually like a fully integrated understanding that this person has value, that they have dignity, that I am to honor them even in the space of the pain that they've experienced. Like, I just like feel my heart actually have the space for that, that I don't have
Wow.
the same space for it when I'm living, like, because I guess that's kind of that thing, right? Like, I don't know quite how the words for it, but like the feeling we're talking about is like fake honor. Let's call it fake honor for right now, right? Fake
Right.
honor said.
Tolerance. Yeah.
So let's put a fake example just for the situation. Um, let's say we had a conversation and I felt hurt by something you said, right? I
Yeah.
hope at this point in our friendship there is trust to say Bridget will call me back and say, hey, something didn't feel right for me.
Yeah.
But if
Yeah.
I leave that situation, and I have to abandon me, right? To say, oh, I have to protect Jared. He was on the podcast. He's a pastor. I have to honor Jared. I can't acknowledge that he caused pain for me, or that his action, led to an experience of pain for me. Because it could be intentional. It could be not intentional. That's not for me to judge, right? Then I have to abandon me. And when I abandon me, I no longer have capacity to hold real honor towards you, because I have to
Wow.
make you into some sort of villain to pseudo to pseudo honor the pain. I know that's like a whole big circle around.
Yeah.
Um,
No, that's so good.
but that's a difference in what I'm going to call fake honor, or maybe we'll call it empty honor. Empty honor.
Empty honor. That's good. That's good.
Empty honor requires an abandonment of one of the three things, of God, self, or others. Where
Yeah.
like embodied honor, holistic honor says, I honor myself in the experience, the good, the bad, the ugly, the pain, and the promise. I honor that also in the other human being that is rooted in goodness, even in harm. And that I can also hold that with God too, right? I can hold up,
That's good.
hey, I,
Yeah.
I want to honor God with my life, but when my whole life is built around me honoring God, means that I can't question God. It means that I can't disagree with God. It means that I,
Mm.
can't have just real questions about, I don't even know if I believe this about God. Like when we live with empty honor, there's no space for that. Um,
Wow.
yeah, it's just, um,
You said something there about like, and maybe we can circle back to this. You said something there about the golden rule, because again, even if you're
mhm,
not a Christian, you realize
yep.
how potent that teaching is. Like love others as you love yourself.
Mhm,
I wonder how much of the issues that the evangelical church is experiencing is because people actually did follow Jesus and they
mhm.
are loving people as they love themselves. It's just really bad.
Whoa.
Um,
Yeah.
you see all of these. You see, like everybody's like, oh, it's because they're not following Jesus. I wonder if we are,
Mhm,
and we're loving. The reason why there's so much division is because in the individual, normal Protestant evangelical Christian, there is division, right?
mhm.
Division between the self that is not fully integrated, and then
Yep.
between that person and the person that needs the the love and honor that God provides when you're fully integrated. So it's like,
Mhm,
no, I think that most Christians that would call themselves Christians are
mhm,
actually loving other people the way they love themselves. It's just really, really empty love, or
mhm,
for our context, um, empty honor.
mhm.
What do you feel there?
Um, yeah, I think that for me, this is the context that I have is I just had recently on the podcast, we had an artist. Her name is Krista Perotti, and she's a consultant and just a beautiful human. And she's has a really beautiful gift in like words and art. And so I have a piece of her artwork that says, "You are worth taking up space."
Wow.
And I think about, for me, learning to live integrated with honor in my own body has been this belief that like I actually can take up space. That like
Yeah.
and that means that my voice matters in a staff meeting. That means that there are boundaries in the way I'm communicated to. So that means that the relationships that I build in my life, to say, um, hey Jared, for you to be friends with me, it means that you're not going to scream at me and tell me I'm an idiot. Like I have the right to take up space and to expect that of you or any other human,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I think in that space is the like there is a Christy Bauman also talks about this. She does a lot of work on understanding healthy female sexuality. And one of the things that she talks about in her book, The Sexually Healthy Woman, is what true submission is. Again, touchy word that we'll get into in another podcast. But she
Yeah.
says the heart of true submission is allowing the other person to carry the full weight and cost of what it means to love you.
Wow.
And so I think about, right, honoring God means that is the cross. And that is the piece of acknowledging sinfulness and the need of a savior. And my submission to Christ is saying, I cannot carry the full cost of what it means to love me as a messy human, but I acknowledge that you've paid that and I am submitted to you carrying that cost. I think about that in my friendships to say, hey, like, it feels really vulnerable for me to share this part of my story with you, but in submission, in that self sacrifice, it's saying, I'm going to carry, like, I'm going to let you carry the cost of what it means to love me, and I'm going to carry the same for you, right? Because that's the
Yeah.
honor piece, is the like, when I'm laying my life down, right? It's saying, I'm going to honor the fact, like, I'm gonna honor that I matter, but I'm also going to carry the cost of what it means to honor the humanity in you as well.
Yep. Yep. I remember you telling me this story, and I won't violate honor here
Yeah, you're
by
good.
bearing the story because I don't know if you want to share it or not. But you told me this story about you were saying a similar thing. This was a year ago. You were telling me this like about you and a friend and you having to get to the space where you allowed your friend in on one of your like idiosyncrasies that may not
Mm-hmm.
be the same for somebody else. It was something so
Mm-hmm.
small and you even said it. It was like this is not like even as I'm telling you this is not the whole of my persons. This is just something that I have to be okay with. And I remember you telling me the story, and I began to think about my own self
Yeah.
and knowing that because of trauma, some of it is because of the way God made me. There's like these little moments of OCD that I have,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
it led me to have a deeper conversation with my wife about some things that
Cool.
like really do drive me insane. But I held on to it
Yeah.
after like 5 years, 7 years of marriage at the time. It was like, uh, and if you would have asked me then, it would have been well because I'm a lot.
Mm.
Like I know I'm very particular. There's no grass in my car floorboards. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I mop the floor every week. I
Mm-hmm.
sweep every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that again, like I said, it is kind of but some of those things I really do enjoy. Like if I turn the
Mm-hmm.
camera to you, like we're in the house and there's a candle lit right now.
Mm-hmm.
I want
Mm-hmm.
it to smell nice. And but
Yeah.
the cool thing is, and this is a really great example, is that I didn't light that candle. My
Mm-hmm.
wife works from home, and she's before I sat down, there was like a bunch of clutter on this table. I'm at
Mm-hmm.
my dining room table, and there wasn't a candle lit. And before I sat down for this podcast, she said, "You can't work like that."
Mm.
I went to the restroom and like freshened up to come back over, and the table was cleared off and the candle was lit.
Wow.
Um, Even though that may not be a thing for her,
Mm-hmm.
when I let her in on that conversation of going, "Hey, babe, you've walked through with me through my therapy journey. You've
Mm-hmm.
walked with me through getting healthy and whole. Here's how you understand me, carrying the full weight." And then there's other examples for me of how I care and do the same for her. But that was such a great example of allowing her the space to
Mm-hmm.
honor me in a space that for years, my entire life, I hid
Mm-hmm.
um, to make myself seem uh, like an easier load.
Yeah.
Because sweeping the floor and keeping my fingernails cut and showering
Mm-hmm.
twice a day, sometimes 3 times a day, and changing socks if I change
Mm-hmm.
shoes, like in my mind felt like so much, and I never wanted to burden somebody.
Mm-hmm.
But it actually was a form of dishonor because I wasn't letting somebody in my
Mm-hmm.
space
Yeah.
to heal. Because
Wow.
again, just to go all the way back, like uh, it's going to be impossible to love others as you love yourself
Mm-hmm.
if there's not ways you're honoring yourself well. And I think that
Yeah.
is such a massive piece of allowing people to bear the weight of you.
Mm-hmm.
And the people that I see that do this incredibly well, right? Like they're really great at letting other people bear their weight, but they're
Mm-hmm.
horrible about bearing the weight of others. Like
Mm-hmm.
honor only is achieved when you're bearing, Paul even says this, right? He says, bear one another's burdens.
Yep.
He didn't say, let someone else just bear yours. It's a one another. So it's this beautiful, like, no, I'm going to carry yours as well as you carrying mine. That's the place where honor finds its secret. And that's where it's
Yep.
like the most tangible and beautiful.
Wow. So good. So good. Well, I think we need to wrap up our conversation today, but I am so grateful for you, just for the integrity that you've carried in your own life in navigating conversations that matter and facilitating spaces where people can actually show up in brokenness and acknowledge that there's beauty in all of our stories. And so, yeah, I'm just grateful for the honor that you've carried in your own life, in our friendship, and for our listeners today. If our friends want to get in contact with you or follow along with you online, where can they do that?
We're actually in the process of planning a church, and the church is called Eden Church Houston. So you can find us online or on Instagram, and it's Eden Church Houston. You can also find us on YouTube. We're going to be putting some talks out actually about starting from the garden instead of the cross.
Wow.
So you can find us there and join along in our journey. It's going to be a beautiful space, like you said, to allow people opportunities to experience God in a totally different way. So we'd love for you to follow along there. Personally, you can follow me at Jared Darby on Instagram, and it's just one D. So somebody else had Jared Darby taken, so I just went JaredDarby. So
great.
You can follow me there and connect.
Amazing. Well, friends, I hope you take some time this week. I know this was a big episode, just to kind of go slow and share it with your friends and, have some conversations. For me, that's my hope, is that these would be able to be a springboard into conversations in your own context of what it means to live more deeply connected and present to your story. Until next time, grieve well, rest well, and love well. And we'll see you back here at the Recover Your Life podcast.